Hello, and welcome to my TED Talk. I'm here today to talk about skiing. Specifically, coming skiing with me in March. Cheers.
Now, before you click off this promotional video, please be aware that as a member of Phil's, you are required to watch this video by law as part of your contract. I'd like to introduce you to Sauze Do. Sauze, as it's more commonly known as, is a winter ski and summer resort in the Italian Alps. It is part of the Violetta Milky Way ski area, which covers over 400 kilometers of ski runs, with over 72 lift systems to connect them. Sauze itself was a venue of the 2006 Turin Winter Olympics. The town itself is home to many hotels and apartments, with plenty of options for accommodation. It also has extensive nightlife, which I will cover shortly. Now, this is predominantly a skiing holiday, so I do need to talk about the skiing. As I mentioned a moment ago, the Milky Way ski area, which Sauze is a part of, covers 400 kilometers of piste. The keen-eyed amongst you will have noticed that the piste map I'm showing you looks to be full of red runs, with some blue. Before I go any further, I do need to stress to you that these runs are not graded the same as they were in Bulgaria or any other resorts you may have previously travelled to. To simplify this, for those of us that were in Borovets in January 2022, the blue runs are similar to the green runs we experienced. The majority of the red runs are equivalent to the blue runs in Bulgaria. There is, however, a small minority of red runs that are steeper for short sections. However, these runs are typically quite wide and therefore manageable. The black runs are doable for the braver of you. The takeaway fact from this is that I can assure you that anybody that wants to go on this trip will be able to ski the runs there. I guarantee it. Should anyone want to go, there is also an opportunity to go to a ski school. However, I can recommend going to somewhere like Traus for those of us that never skied before, as it will definitely allow you to make the most of your time on the mountain. Speaking of time on the mountain, some of the best time spent on the mountain is in the cafes and bars that can be found there. I will now talk about some of my favourites. Firstly, there is Orso Bianco. This place sits at the bottom of many of the surrounding ski runs in Sauze. It is a great meeting point and has a great post-ski après vibe. When you are done, it is just a short ski down to the village. Barbacete. This place is great for breakfast, some of the best views in the area, a coffee and croissant in the morning looking out over the mountain. This place was my favourite the last time I was here. Heading back into town, you have the infamous Ghost Bar. Once you finish skiing for the day, the après begins. Before you head back to your room, it would be sacrilege not to have a cheeky pint in here. It is cheap pints, free food with your drink. What's not to like? And lastly, for those Guinness lovers of us out there, there is Paddy McGinty's. I don't need to say any more. At this point you may be asking, but how can I afford to go on this trip? It sounds so expensive. This is the kicker. The Phil's Travel Bureau can provide this ski trip for under £600. That's 5 nights, 4 days of skiing for less than a Thai bride. How is it so cheap? The trick is that we're not using any travel company to do this trip. It just requires a little trust in yours truly. Flights. The easiest way to travel there is from Stansted Airport to Turin. The flight takes 2 hours and costs approximately £85 return once the added extras are put on. As you can tell, these flights have been selected to make the most of our time in the country. There are not too many choices of flight times to Turin, however I am more than willing to drive. Please bear in mind that there would be about a £10, £12.50 cost per head to park if we shared a car. Once we've landed in Italy, this is where the adventure starts. This may be the most controversial part of this trip. Bear in mind that by the time we go, I will have made this trip twice already. From the airport, we would need to take 2 buses and a train to get to Sauze. This takes approximately 3 hours to do. However, the journey is very scenic and it's very, very cheap. When I went back in March 2023, the trains cost €7 each way. If that doesn't float your boat, we can also look at hiring a car from the sort of beginning and from what I've looked at already, this would cost about £70 per person. That's based off my self-driving. It could be cheaper if someone over the age of 25 was willing to drive. That also would be the issue of hiring a car, as there is not much parking in Sauze itself. If you wanted to book a taxi instead, this would cost around about £100 return per person. As I mentioned earlier, there is plenty of choice for accommodation in Sauze. The cheapest of this would be to rent an apartment. Now for 4 people for 5 nights, this would equate to £223.50 each. That's £44.70 per night. To keep these costs low, I hope you don't mind getting cosy with your homie. If that is too cosy for you, we could look at a nicer hotel. This would be a fair bit more expensive. It works out around £336.25p per head, or £67.25p per night. But breakfast is included, and it has the added benefit of looking quite nice too. Now, upon my latest conversation with James, there has been mention that there could possibly be 5 people going on this trip. Now, an apartment for 5 would cost £129.20p for 5 nights. That's £25.84 per night. This place also has separate beds as well. Sorry, Jake. I will link I will link all 3 of those properties in the description. Ski expenses are typically where ski holidays get expensive. This trip is based off 5 nights, which would allow for 4 days of skiing. Now, a 4-day lift pass during March costs £150.43, and for 4 days of ski hire it would cost £72.35. This would be the total cost of your skiing. The lift pass as well, it would not need to be paid until we reach Sauze itself, so you don't have to pay that up front. I will touch on that in a moment. For those of us that are too lazy to count, the cheapest 4-man trip to Sauze would cost £583.78. Now, if you wanted to stay in a nice hotel, it would be looking at £696.53. Or if there was 5 of us and we used the apartment I mentioned earlier, the cost would only be £489.48 per person. Now, obviously, bear in mind, if you wanted to travel in style via a car or via a taxi, these costs would be higher. But as someone who has made this trip, it does sound worse than it is. I really enjoyed the train journey when I made it, and I'd be more than willing to do it again. It's not like driving a bus through Norwich. So to touch on what I mentioned earlier, because you cannot pre-order the lift pass, and we would not need to pay for the public transport until we actually get to Italy, £190, which is what I've included in these costs, would not need to be paid up front, which means if 5 of us wanted to go to that apartment, we'd only need to pay £300 up front. So just to understand when and how this would work, currently there is obviously an uncertainty in how many people would be able to go on this trip. I am going to allow some time to people to think about whether or not they would like to go. This trip will be booked at the end of January. I'm currently actually going to go to Sauze on the 15th of January just to test the location for Phil's purposes. Closer to the time when I do have an idea of the numbers, what kind of travel we'd like to take, and the accommodation that people would like, I will rerun those numbers then. Now, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask me, and you can also speak with either myself or James Jack to show interest. Thank you.